Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I wish to welcome you to this webinar focused on the use of international public finance to support national adaptation plan processes. My name is Joellen Parry, and I'm the adaptation lead at the International Institute for Sustainable Development, which hosts the Secretariat of the NAP Global Network. For today's webinar, I'm joined by two colleagues, Jason Spenceley from the Green Climate Fund, who will be describing adaptation finance available through the GCF, and Azrat Yurgo Sinato of Ethiopia's Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, who will describe his country's experience in accessing international public finance for the NAP process. To begin with, though, I will provide you with a quick overview of the NAP Global Network and set the broader context in which our discussion about international public finance will take place. To begin with, you saw a bit about the NAP Global Network through our introductory video, but as a bit more background, the network was established at the end of 2014 at COP20 in Lima by developing countries and bilateral donors who recognize the growing importance of the NAP process and the need to enhance support and coordination around it. Initial financial support for the network has been provided by the United States and Germany, and we have since received additional financial support from Austria and Canada, as well as been joined by a number of new bilateral donors. Today, the network also has members from about 99 countries around the world. The NAP Global Network works to advance the coordination of the efforts of many actors who need to be involved in a NAP process, including domestic actors, but also the development partners that support them. The network also focuses on advancing learning about approaches and best practices for successful national adaptation planning and action based on the experiences that countries are gaining as they engage in the process. And finally, we have a niche with respect to highlighting the importance of bilateral support for the NAP process, particularly given the high proportion of bilateral support for adaptation and climate-sensitive sectors. We see all of these factors as being key to our goal of enhancing national adaptation planning and action in developing countries. To achieve the aims of the network, we focus on advancing adaptation planning and action through the following activities: sustained peer learning and exchange, support for national level action, and enhancing bilateral support for the NAP process. Some of the key components of these activities are listed on the slide before you, and I'll point to some further information about them at the end of this webinar. To inform all of these activities, we also conduct analysis and develop communications and knowledge products on specific topics related to the NAP process. Here, the network aims for thought leadership on technical topics that are of interest to adaptation planners and those supporting them. The key themes in which the network is working on are sector integration of adaptation, vertical integration of adaptation, the NAP process relationship with NDCs and the Sustainable Development Goals, gender in the NAP process, and financing the NAP process. This webinar is one of a series of activities that the network is undertaking in relation to our thematic focus on financing the NAP process. For today, we are going to be, at this point in time, I'm going to launch into the formal part of this webinar by providing an overview of the financing needs of the NAP process. I will then turn the webinar over to Jason Spenceley, who will highlight the adaptation finance available through the Green Climate Fund. His presentation will be followed by that of Azrat Yergo-Sanato, who will present on Ethiopia's experience in accessing international public finance for the NAP process. And then there will be an opportunity for you to engage in, submit your questions, and we will answer them to the best of our ability. So onward with respect to understanding the financing of the NAP process. As we know, access to and effective utilization of finance will in part determine the success of the NAP processes being undertaken by a growing number of developing countries. We also know that financing is going to be needed throughout the NAP process, from its initiation to the identification and prioritization of adaptation actions and the establishment of monitoring and evaluation systems. Financing for the NAP process is also needed on an ongoing basis, given its iterative nature. As strategies and plans are periodically reviewed and updated and new initiatives are launched, there is going to be additional financing needed to advance the NAP process. When we talk about the financing needs of the NAP process, we can look at it from the perspective that financing is needed to cover two general types of costs. Those are operating costs, or the costs associated with the ongoing coordination and facilitation of the NAP process. These include administrative costs and management costs, such as those related to ensuring that there's adequate personnel to manage and move forward the NAP process, and also to establish and maintain monitoring and evaluation systems. Well, financing is also needed to cover the costs associated with investment, and those can be the costs associated with developing and maintaining infrastructure and technologies for adaptation. This includes things like construction costs and investments in public goods like education and health. Of these two costs, it is expected that significant financing will be needed to cover investment costs, such as those associated with the implementation of projects, programs, and initiatives. The amount of financing needed to cover these costs will vary from country to country, depending on factors such as the expected impacts of climate change within a country, its development context and adaptive capacity, the extent to which adaptation planning and action has already been undertaken, and the number and scope of prioritized adaptation actions that a country has identified. While financing will vary from country to country, significant financing is likely to be required throughout the entire NAP process. When thinking about the NAP process and its financing requirements, it's helpful to divide the process into two phases, the development phase and the implementation phase. The development phase includes those activities related to the initiation, coordination, and maintenance of the NAP process. Consistent with the steps covered in the NAP technical guidelines produced by the Least Developed Countries Expert Group, this includes launching the NAP process and establishing institutional arrangements, undertaking preparatory activities such as climate vulnerability assessments, developing implementation strategies, including a financing strategy, and reporting, monitoring, and reviewing the process on a continual basis. The implementation phase of the NAP process encompasses all those activities associated with the actual preparation and implementation of individual actions prioritized through the development phase of the NAP process. So this includes the preparation of detailed plans and prioritized adaptation for prioritized projects, programs, and initiatives, including engagement with stakeholders, comprehensive cost estimates, and the preparation of funding proposals. The implementation phase also includes the implementation of prioritized adaptation actions. And as you know, those actions can be quite diverse and could include things like improving access to climate information, strengthening extension services, supporting access to and sustainable management of natural resources, or investing in infrastructure and technologies. Across both of these phases, we know that there's also going to be investments needed in capacity development, institutional strengthening, and stakeholder engagement. The amount of financing needed across these two phases differs significantly. Through the development phase, although there's a greater number of identified elements within the development phase, the financing needs within it is going to be less than the financing needs in the implementation phase. The implementation phase will require more financing because of the diversity of potential investments to be made within it. Those investments will need to be made at different jurisdictional levels, across different sectors, and for a wide variety of different activities. As well, the actors that are involved in the processes will differ between the two phases. In the development phase, most of the costs associated with the NAP process are likely to be borne by government. This includes the ministry responsible for the coordination of the NAP process. It also includes sectoral ministries, subnational authorities, and state agencies. These actors will need financing to support consultations with stakeholders, the development of sectoral strategies, to access new information, and to integrate adaptation into planning and budgeting processes. In the implementation phase, a wider number of actors is required for financing. So while ministries and subnational governments will require financing to implement their planned adaptation actions, so too will actors outside of government, such as NGOs and the private sector. So where is all of this financing going to come from, and how is it that is needed by these wide range of different actors to support the different activities within the NAP process? It's possible to identify a range of sources of financing for the NAP process. These may be broadly characterized in two ways, whether the source is domestic or international, or if the investor is public or private. Based on this characterization, some general sources of financing can be identified. These include domestic public finance, such as national, sectoral, and subnational budgets, international public finance, including bilateral providers, multilateral funds, and multilateral development banks, and thirdly, private finance, including private financiers and private enterprises. Countries will need to combine financing from these different sources to support their NAP processes, and each of them has their own characteristics which may make them more suitable for financing some activities within the different phases of the NAP process. So today our focus is on international public finance that could be used to support NAP processes. There are a number of different sources of finance within this category that developing country governments can and are considering as they develop dedicated financing strategies for their NAP processes. These sources include bilateral providers who can be actively engaged in financing both the development and implementation phases of the NAP process. Some bilateral providers are providing grant-based technical assistance to advance the development phase of the NAP process, often as part of a suite of broader activities that are advancing adaptation action. There's also greater opportunity for securing bilateral support for the implementation phase of the NAP process. This assistance may be in the form of technical assistance or financial assistance for specific projects, including financing provided by bilateral development banks. It also can be in the form of budgetary support and basket financing that can be used to leverage or finance larger projects and programs and sectoral initiatives. Financing from bilateral providers for the NAP process has a number of advantages. It can be used to finance a wide range of activities, including the operational costs associated with the initiating and maintaining the NAP process, for strengthening institutions and building capacity, and strengthening monitoring and evaluation systems. Grants from bilateral providers also can be seen as a low-risk source of financing, which can enable governments to test innovative approaches to achieving their adaptation goals. Finally, financing for bilateral providers can also be used to leverage finance from other sources, such as the private sector. A second source of international public finance is multilateral providers, and this includes the diverse array of multilateral funds, most prominent among which are those established under the auspices of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. These include the Green Climate Fund, through which countries can access financing for the development phase of their NAP process via its Readiness and Preparatory Support Program. And Jason, of course, will be speaking more about the role of the GCF in financing adaptation in a few minutes. Dedicated financing for the NAP process is also available through the Least Developed Countries Fund and the Special Climate Change Fund. Both of these funds have been mandated by the UNFCCC to support activities to enable the NAP process in least developed countries and other developing countries, respectively. The Adaptation Fund also can be accessed to finance concrete adaptation projects during the implementation phase of the NAP process. We can also look for financing from funds that have been established outside of the UNFCCC process that may be valuable for advancing the NAP process, particularly its implementation phase. Among these funds are the Pilot Program for Climate Resilience, the Adaptation to Smallholders Agriculture Program, and the Africa Climate Change Fund. There's also opportunities associated with non-climate change focused multilateral funds, such as the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, and looking at the opportunities related to the global environment facilities, focal areas in biodiversity, forests, international waters, and land degradation. A third source of international public finance that can be considered for the implementation phase of the NAP process are multilateral development banks. Financing from MDBs can be used to directly fund discrete adaptation projects, as well as development projects that include the incremental costs associated with the provision of adaptation co-benefits. Multilateral development banks are particularly well suited for financing prioritized adaptation actions in sectors such as water and wastewater systems, energy, infrastructure, and food production. They can also help to catalyze additional resources from public and private sources. Given the number of potential sources of international public finance for the NAP process, countries should have a clear understanding of their different funding modalities and how they can best be aligned with the financing needs of their NAP processes. This process should take into consideration as well how other sources of finance, such as domestic public finance and private finance, can be used to support the NAP process. A dedicated NAP financing strategy can play a pivotal role in ensuring that these different sources of finance are brought together in a planned, coordinated, and coherent way, and to ensure that the NAP process is advanced. A dedicated NAP financing strategy can, for example, help identify the projects and programs for which financing from international public sources might be most appropriate. Development of a NAP financing strategy should be initiated early within the NAP process and embedded within it. Its content should be tailored to the different needs and adaptation objectives of a country, as well as its human resources and technical capacities. As well as development should be aligned with other national policies and initiatives, including a country's nationally determined contributions. So the ideas that I have just discussed have been captured in a guidance note prepared by the NAP Global Network, which provides more insight into financing the NAP process and how this might contribute to achieving the adaptation goals of countries' nationally determined contributions. Entitled Financing NAP Processes Contributing to the Achievement of Nationally Determined Contribution Adaptation Goals. This guidance note was collaboratively written by IISD and Germany's GIZ. It's available in English, French, and Spanish and can be downloaded from the resources section of the NAP Global Network website at the URL that's on your screen. You can also access it through the handout section of the webinar control panel. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for your patience, and I would invite, now turn the webinar over to Jason Spenceley to provide us with insights regarding adaptation finance available through the Green Climate Fund.
Oh, I was speaking. I think I've just been unmuted now. I'm gonna, apologies if I'm repeating myself, but thank you for this invitation. My name is Jason Spenceley, Senior Specialist at the Green Climate Fund, responsible for project preparation and adaptation planning. Thank you to the NAP Global Network and to IISD for the invitation. I'm putting my screen to large. So I'd just like to share with you the support that's available from the GCF for adaptation planning, and also share with you some observations based on the proposals we received to date and implementation that's started. I think I have 12 slides and I'll speak for about 15 minutes or so. So first, context. As you may know, the Paris Agreement requested the Green Climate Fund to support countries' formulation of national adaptation plans and or other adaptation planning processes. Then in May of 2016, the board to the Green Climate Fund created a window of support and made available in principle up to $3 million US dollars per country for adaptation planning support for NAPs and or other adaptation planning processes. Yeah, I'm going to unpack that in a moment, the processes and the and or other adaptation planning processes in a little bit. But since May 2016, we have received 44 proposals, of which 12 now have been endorsed or approved, and another 20 of the remaining 32, 20 are actually back with the focal points of the GCF, the National Designated Authorities, pending their resubmission after having benefited from feedback support from the GCF Secretariat. So that's the context. These funds are available, and we look at this as a golden opportunity, $3 million per country. It's a one-time support, it's important to say, which means that it's not like other readiness activities in GCF, that it's an annual amount. It's one time, it's used, and that's it. So one key message, golden opportunity, $3 million just from this fund, and as been very rightly said, there are other sources as well. significant boost to adaptation planning. And we don't get a lot of golden opportunities in a climate change context, unfortunately. So the main message here is, and as the executive director to the GCF often says, use it wisely. And this is where we're going to get into some of the review criteria we have for ensuring quality of the proposals and impact in implementation. Now, this slide, it's important to situate the adaptation planning support in the broader GCF financing continuum. If there's a readiness program, adaptation planning is a piece of it. We look at this as it's a step along the way. It's not a means in itself. It's very important to look at, as it is, adaptation planning processes as an input. Why? To catalyze action and to catalyze larger scale investment for adaptation. It's the implementation that matters. And so we view it really important to look at adaptation planning as a means to catalyze the much larger scale funds that are needed to really address climate change, which are well beyond $3 million in any country, regardless of the size, and well beyond all the other funds available for adaptation planning. So really use this to catalyze larger scale investments. And in the GCF context, this means actually to develop project concepts and a whole project pipeline to seek funds from the GCF, as well as other sources, especially public, private, and other international cooperation sources. Really to reiterate, adaptation planning, why? To design the strategies and actions, to move beyond just the vulnerability assessments, the science-based decision making, which is fundamental, but to use those to drive action, broad-based ownership, and financing, including, but not exclusively, the Green Climate Fund project pipeline. What that means tangibly is we see it as a good practice with the GCF support to produce a series of specific concept notes, a pipeline of GCF project ideas and concept notes for the GCF, again, as well as other public, private, and international cooperation sources. In doing so, it's important to remember the for the GCF target, for targeting GCF concept notes, it's important to remember the 6 investment criteria for funding proposals of the Green Climate Fund, which are conveyed here: impact potential, paradigm shift, sustainable development potential, country ownership, etc. Okay. Once again, there adaptation planning, a component of GCF's readiness program, and it's up to $3 million per country, one-time opportunity. Now, as has been very rightly said also in the earlier presentation, this is just one source of funds. There are others here, as well as guidance and knowledge sharing, and the NAP Global Network being a key actor in this area. So again, this is a snapshot of status: 44 proposals, 16 of which are from LDCs, 4 from SIDS, and progressing. This is the message of this slide is just that the strategic plan of the Green Climate Fund envisions a lot of growth in this area in terms of the number of proposals we receive, and we're aiming to ramp up the numbers approved and endorsed and dispersed in each quarter in 2018. At the same time, we say that, so that's our plan, and this is what we're building to. And by the way, sharing the opportunity and information, including through this webinar, including with other opportunities with the NAP Global Network and many other partners, is a piece of the strategy to enable this this growth and support to countries to use this golden opportunity to invest in adaptation planning, to catalyze larger scale investments in adaptation. At the same time, as we share this ambition with countries, the board to the Green Climate Fund has been very clear that we need to strengthen the quality. We need to strengthen the quality of proposals at entry, proposals sent to us, and certainly what we approve. The board has been very clear, our board has been very clear that this is important so that they continue making the resources available so that we meet the targets that I showed previously as per our strategic plan. So as part of this strategy to together strengthen the quality to ensure that these funds are used really to catalyze impact and to catalyze action and investment, I'd like to share some, we can call them good practices, or we can call them observations based on the proposals we've received to date. And before there are 10 I'd like to share with you over 3 slides. But before I do, even a first one I'm gonna share is the importance of choosing the delivery partner for the Green Climate Fund's adaptation planning support purposefully, wisely. I'm going to explain that now. All readiness activities, including adaptation planning through the Green Climate Fund, are delivered by a delivery partner. The funds go from the GCF to the delivery partner. The delivery partner can be any organization that the National Designated Authority defines, the focal point to the GCF, the NDA. It can be the NDA itself, or it can be any national organization, subnational organization. It can be a private entity, it can be a public entity, it can be an international actor. It can be what's called an accredited entity, which means that they're accredited to actually deliver projects, but it doesn't have to be. Some people who know the Green Climate Fund well might know that there are a number of accredited entities, and they submit and receive the large-scale funding for proposals. But readiness, including adaptation planning, does not have to be with an accredited entity. It's actually, we view it as a good practice to do adaptation planning in country, with institutions in country, to have it very close to, because adaptation's local, planning is very country-specific process, and country ownership is key. However, at the end of the day, it's the decision of the NDA to choose, the National Designated Authority to choose. Now, 10 other specific good practices. First of all, and these 10 are exactly what we use when we review each of the proposals and we provide comments. So it's exactly what we're looking for. We think it's very important to share very transparently the review criteria that the Secretariat uses. First is clarity of focus, strategic focus within a national vision. For example, is what's needed national scale adaptation planning, or has national scale been done and the focus now shifts to sectoral or to municipal? Remember that the GCF's mandate is to support national adaptation planning and or other adaptation planning processes. Any national or sectoral should of course be done in a national vision. We also see that it's the more local planning is, the more likely, and the more specific, I should say, the more specific adaptation planning is, the more likely it is to catalyze action and investment. And so we have the flexibility based on the country context to move from national to sectoral to local to community planning to a subnational planning based on what's needed in the country and the status of ongoing adaptation planning efforts in the country. And this is where countries can blend and time resources for adaptation planning using different resources. Second, designing based on specific impacts and vulnerabilities, avoiding the temptation to use sort of template guidance for proposals. This is where we a number of our comments and reviews focus in this area. What is the specific climate impacts in the country that are, many of which are already known, are already in existing documents, and designed based on those specific impacts or vulnerabilities. Third, building private sector ownership for investing in the resilience, really using this golden opportunity of these funds to do the studies, to communicate the information, to do the planning together with businesses for their resilience strategies, to drive private sector investment, and that's specific review criteria. Fourth, designing adaptation planning investment vision for the implementation strategy, if you will. So any priority out of adaptation planning identified should have an investment strategy. Where's the investment going to come from? Is it Ministry of Finance? Is it another line ministry? Is it the private sector? Is it international cooperation? Is it GEF? Is it GCF? And if so, produce a concept note. And the funds can go right to the specifics, producing the materials needed to make the case to different financing opportunities. Some countries are using the funds to have cooperation roundtables, donor roundtables based on the outcomes of the adaptation planning process, and we view that as a good practice. Clearly articulating a clear theory of change, and adaptively managing that. Six, avoiding the temptation to do similar, duplicate assessments and studies that have been done by others. So building on what's already there. There are three more, of which I'm missing the slide. Strong stakeholder engagement strategy, strong gender strategy, and a 10th you're going to bear with me on because I've missed the slide. I'd like to now just say where we're moving ahead. The challenges we've been having, our big focus has been on strengthening the contextualization of the proposals in national context, focusing the proposals on later stage adaptation planning, including attracting investment for implementation. In 2017, recently, we've advanced in articulating what we see as quality. And in 2018, we're going to continue our focus on strengthening quality and impact from our investments. We'll be deepening the guidance further, and we'll be strengthening our more proactive support directly to focal points, NDAs, for the design of their proposals as they're developing them. That's the status, as well as some of the good practices, observations we're seeing. And I hope there'll be an opportunity for exchange. I'm really looking forward to hearing, maybe most importantly, from the case of Ethiopia, so we can get a little bit beyond the theory that you've been hearing from us, and now getting practical to a specific country example. Thank you very much. Is there something I do to give the...
Okay, I'm wondering if I have taken the floor, the virtual floor.
Yes, you have.
Hello? Okay, thanks. Global Network for giving me this opportunity. Thanks IISD for giving me this opportunity. I'm going to share with you the public financing for the process, the Ethiopian case study. I'll give you a number. I will also have the different funding mechanisms that Ethiopia has been receiving the last couple of years. And finally, I will focus and give you a brief of an overview of the recently approved GCF project. So just to set the scene, this is the Ethiopia Climate Resilient Green Economy Strategy in 2011 in Durban at COP17. This strategy, this famous strategy, has two components. The first one is the climate resilient that talks about adaptation, and the green economy strategy that speaks about mitigation. And this strategy, this big strategy, this wonderful strategy, very comprehensive strategy, has three complementary goals. The first one is building resilience capacity of the different development policies and other stuffs, and also sustaining economic development in the country, that is achieving a middle income status by 2025 and net zero emission. So the NAP sets out and elaborates the details of how the climate resilient objectives will be achieved in an iterative, country-driven, and sustainable manner, and also in a gender-sensitive and an integrated manner. So let me give you a highlight of the Ethiopia's NAP vision. I mean, the vision of Ethiopia NAP is to create a climate change impact resilient development for Ethiopia and its people. With the scope touches on importantly different development and service sectors within the different spectrum of sectors, focusing on agriculture, forestry, water, energy, transport, urban industry, and health. Education is also there. So as we know, the NAP process, it's one of the principles of the NAP process is prioritization. Even prioritizing the strategic priorities is one of the most important things that we have identified in the NAP process. So when we look at these priorities, there are 5 important priorities identified in the NAP process. The first one is mainstreaming. I mean, mainstreaming is almost in our DNA. I mean, we have to mainstream. That is the way we can get it. That is the way we can only get it. Mainstreaming climate change adaptation into the different policies, strategies, and plans is identified as #1 strategy in Ethiopian NAP. The second one is capacity building, long-term, consistent, long-term capacities of institutional structure, which are involved in the NAP process. That's also very important in the NAP. The third one is improving the knowledge management system for the NAP Ethiopia, and establishing effective and sustainable funding mechanism is also very important. So these priorities are not mutually exclusive. They are connected. They are really interconnected, and even they are more interconnected when we see the different objectives, the specific objective of the NAP. So let me take you through the specific objectives of Ethiopia NAP. As I already have mentioned, there is interconnectivity between the vision, the objective, and the identified prioritized strategies. So the first one, the specific objective of the NAP is mainstreaming climate change adaptation holistically within Ethiopia's long-term development path in an integrated manner. And the second specific objective of NAP Ethiopia is also to mainstream and institutionalize the implementation of climate change adaptation in the country's development governance structure and secure its continuity. And the fourth specific objective is to mobilize resources from public and private climate finances, and as such, in a way to ensure sustainable development and fill the funding gap. And the fourth and the last but not the least is establish resilient systems that can withstand disasters and risk. So these are the most important specific characteristics of the Ethiopian NAP. Now, as we all know, the NAP has its own characteristics, and which differs from the NAPA. I mean, we all know also that NAPAs gave birth to NAPs. So when we look at the characteristics of the Ethiopia NAP, in terms of time frame, it aims for medium to long-term adaptation needs. It speaks to the climate resilient green economy. I mean, that means in terms of time frame, we are talking about 2070 to 2030. And also the nature of the NAP is programmatic, cross-sectoral, and trans-regional, as well as there is a synergy within these entities. The Ethiopian NAP also uses scenarios and uncertainties based available scenario, working closely with academia and also working closely with meteorological stations. We are using the most, we have used and still using the most available scenario, climate information. The other important thing which makes very distinct the Ethiopian NAP is that it considers empirical vulnerability assessments. We're talking about very empirical data, very empirical figures are considered in the Ethiopian NAP. That is to say, we are taking care of uncertainties in a very scientific way, and it is also handled in a very scientific and practical way. So adaptation plan, the adaptation plan also, Ethiopian NAP also outlines and prioritizes adaptation options. 18 adaptation options are already prioritized, and these adaptation options will give to concrete adaptation investments and projects to galvanize adaptation actions at a national level, and thereof to strategize. And these all actions are intertwined to each other. So where are we now? I mean, where are we in terms of our NAP? Just to give you a highlight on the status of Ethiopian NAP. We launched our NAP in September 2017. As we speak, at the moment, we are doing regional prioritization workshops and ongoing adaptation training with the support from the NAP Global Network and IISD. Thanks for that. And also, as we speak, also we are also supporting the government. We are also doing a GCF readiness proposal is underway to benefit from that golden opportunity Jason mentioned about. So, and going forward, we'll be doing gender analysis next year, and we'll be also doing NAP financing roadmap in the next April and May. These are few of, some of the points just to give you a highlight. Otherwise, there are also lots of activities we are doing at the moment. Just also to give you the funding landscape, who is doing what, who is funding what in Ethiopia. I mean, as we know, Ethiopia is one of the major receivers of international climate change funding in Africa. I mean, funding has been coming not from Norway, DFID, Sweden, the World Bank and Adaptation Fund. So, and also Ethiopia has already received the fast track finance of 362 million USD a couple of years ago, but that money has already been exhausted, but there is still some money that we are still using. Adaptation Fund is also an important source of funding for Ethiopia. 10 million is in the pipeline. Ethiopia receives adaptation. Ethiopia already have received adaptation finance from that amounts 25 million in 2010, 2011, and 2012. So the World Bank, the UNDP, and other are also important, significant contributors of climate change funding in Ethiopia. So the CRG outlined, the NAP also outlined the potential funding sources for Ethiopia: domestic, innovative financing, the Green Climate Fund, carbon market, federal block grants, fast track finances, concessional loan is also there as a strategy, but we haven't yet secured from that bit of funding. What we have succeeded is from the global climate funding bit, and we are also working. We also have secured from the fast track financing. Now, let me just give you a brief highlight of the recently approved GCF proposal. for Ethiopia. The title of the project is responding to the increasing risks of droughts, building gender-responsive resilience to the most vulnerable communities in Ethiopia. I mean, this project aims at increasing or building the resilience of 500,000 peoples against droughts by increasing access to safe drinking water in Ethiopia. So this is a 5-year project, basically from 2018 to 2023, sorry. And the NDA, the designated national authority for this project is UNFCCC, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. That is what I represent. The national implementing entity is MOFEC. This is a direct access funding, which is being secured from GCF. And the executing entities for this particular project are the Ministry of Agriculture and Natural Resources and the Ministry of Water and Irrigation. So this is basically a water supply project. I mean, it's a project which aims at increasing access to water for almost 500,000 peoples in Ethiopia. So let me just give you the process of this GCF funding. This GCF funding proposal development started in 2015, February 2015, and lots of consultants were engaged and involved. When at the start the budget was 250 million USD, so you can see how big it was at the beginning. So lots of local experts, international consultants worked on this together. Lots of back and forth email, lots of discussions, lots of workshops has been still going through, because although the proposal has been approved, the contract has not been signed because there are still issues to be addressed. So CDKN and UNDP have played a very important role in developing this proposal. They have worked with local consultants, and they have worked in addressing the requirements in terms of meeting key stakeholders. They also have worked with the NDA, the MFCC, in terms of securing the required endorsement and letter. Through refinement of the proposal in preparation and submission, the technical committee submitted this proposal. First, the technical committee used UNDP as a multilateral implementing entity. By that time, we submitted in August 2016. The first time submission was done in August 2016, but that proposal failed. It didn't succeed, and we'll discuss why that proposal failed next, in my next slide. So this inspired MOFEC, the Ministry of Finance, Economic Cooperation, to get accreditation as NIE. Actually, MOFEC has already started the process to be accredited as an NIE, but that process was fast-tracked. That process was fast-tracked as a result of that failure. Then immediately in February 2016, MOFEC got this accreditation. Then the redesigning of the proposal was started, and that redesigned proposal was submitted to UNDP, to GCF. Then GCF approved that redesigned proposal, and we will see that submission by GCF, that submission by MOFEC really inspired us, and the budget for MOFEC proposal by that time was 45 million. That's the amount of money which GCF approved, and that is still work underway. So, in generally speaking, UNDP and CDKN support was very, very critical in this process from the very beginning, even during the first submission and the second submission of the proposal. The UNDP and CDKN have really contributed a lot in terms of making this a success. So important documents, funding request forms, log frame. It's very well known endorsement from the respective and the GCF local points. So that is MFCC. These are the most important documents. And there is a patience required in this process in general, as we all know. And now let me just give you lessons at different levels. 5 key lessons from Ethiopia in terms of accreditation as a national implementing entity. And I will give you lessons later on in the proposal development process. The most important lesson is that a pre-accreditation process, a pre-accreditation exercise to identify and address gaps is very, very essential. It's very important. I mean, doing that exercise will build your confidence and enhance your ability to get accredited. Prior experience in a similar process is also critical to fast-track accreditation. When we see MOFEC's experience, MOFEC was already in the process of accreditation for to be accredited by Adaptation Fund. So that fast-tracked for MOFEC to be accredited in the GCF also. So accreditation involves assessing the existing national systems beyond specifically assessing a potential NIA. I mean, accreditation is not only an assessment of that particular NIA, it is an assessment of the country's system. It's an assessment of the country's, how is auditing being done in the country. It's an assessment of the country's fiduciary and national fiduciary and governance system. How is the country in terms of corruption? How is corruption being handled in the country? Those are also factors which affect the NIE accreditation system. I mean, Jason can also tip us in this process. So a holistic operational competency of the NIE is critical in terms of accreditation. Now, let me give you a lesson from the proposal development itself. So in developing the proposal, especially big proposals where multi-stakeholders, multi-government offices, departments are involving, finding synergies across sectors and framing it in the basis of a unifying logic is very, very important. It's very, very important. Otherwise, there will be a lot of time to be spent. There will be a lot of, it's going to be expensive otherwise, unless you agree on one unifying logic. So, and also working across different spheres of government offices needs to be also considered very seriously and strategically, in a way to synthesize, synergize these different government offices. That particular individual working through this different sphere of environment needs to be well informed, communicate, and unpack issues as important. Generating, compiling, and organizing relevant data and information from the different offices is also one of the donkey work that local and international consultants has dealt with. So that needs to be also strategically addressed. Putting together multidisciplinary and multinational consultant team is also important. I mean, important point to consider during proposal development, during this kind of big proposal development, and in a way to ensure also knowledge transfer from international to a local level. Raising awareness about climate funds to improve bankability is also important, especially the importance of raising awareness to the project developer, to the sector experts. I mean, every sector expert is not aware of the GCF. No, they don't know. So it is important, as long as you are working with them, it's important that you raise their awareness, because climate change funds have their own peculiar requirements, have their own peculiar demand. So raising that awareness to these stakeholders will make the bankability much easier and better. So in general, our recommendation when it comes to funding from the GCF is that be ambitious, go for high. I mean, for instance, Ethiopia, when we started with 250 million because that's just ambitiousness. Then the most important part, the reason why the first proposal failed was that make a difference. I mean, differentiates you need to know the difference between development and climate change adaptation project. What is the difference between these two? I mean, our previous proposal was it looked like a development proposal. That's why it failed. Be very clear on your practical. I mean, page by page, word by word, your proposal need to speak. Your proposal need to smell like a climate change proposal. I mean, targets. I mean, you need to have your own. I mean, which hazard are you identifying? Which hazard are you addressing? In our case, it was drought. That is clear now in the revised proposal from page by page. So that needs to be really considered and addressed when you submit a proposal. So communicate about GCF procedures, but don't reinvent the well. This is very clear, and there needs to be a respect, and there has to be a balance between that technocratic best fit and pragmatic national priorities. You need to really maintain the equilibrium and play around. And also involve technical staffs from across the sector and social people's gender, not just environment specialists. So that's it from me. Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you very much, Jason and Azra, for your informative presentations. At this point in time, I would like to open up the session for Q&A. As has been noted in the chat box, we're going to go a bit later than the original time frame for this webinar. We'll try to answer a couple of questions and then we will wrap it up. So there are 2 questions, some initial questions for Jason that I thought I would combine. And these are submitted by Chadia and Michael. They're interested to know the types of projects that have been funded so far by the GCF, and if there's any examples like countries or private sector entities involved in those projects, and the type of financing that the GCF is providing, whether it's in the form of grants, loans, or other mechanisms.
Thank you. I think I'm unmuted. I'll go ahead and respond. So I believe the question is about full funding proposals, not specifically adaptation planning proposals. Assuming that's the case, full funding proposals beyond adaptation planning, which again you'll remember is an earlier step leading to catalyzing larger scale funding. Full funding proposals to the GCF as of today, $2.7 billion worth have been approved as of today, of which 600 million worth of the proposals are now under implementation, which means not only approved, not only the legal funding agreements in place, but first disbursement has been made and they're under implementation. Of these, GCF aims for a 50% focus on balance between adaptation and mitigation. And by the way, half of adaptation, more than half, at least half of adaptation being in LDCs, SIDS, or Africa. That we're currently meeting that focus of more than half in SIDS, LDCs, in Africa, and we're not quite at the 100% balance between mitigation and adaptation, largely because some of the proposals for mitigation are very large scale, and we're finding that more proposals for adaptation, but on a smaller scale. Could be a nature of the the disciplines. They range in sectors, as you can imagine, a lot in agriculture and water, a lot in infrastructure, a lot in ecosystems. There are 8 focal areas, some of which I just mentioned right now of the fund. Grants are available, as are loan, a range of financing instruments are available. Grants, loans, equity. We're trying to get beyond to be truly paradigm shifting and sustainable in the funds. We're trying to use public funds and grants to catalyze larger scale investments, guaranteeing loans for guaranteeing private sector investment, de-risking private sector investment, providing equity for larger scale investments. But the reality is a lot of the projects to date are grants. Have been grants, but again, we're aiming to have use more, let's say, catalytic mixture with catalytic mechanisms as well to catalyze larger scale investment. Geographic diversity is broad, truly geographic diversity. All of the approved funding proposals are on the, and titles and focuses are on the GCF website. Hope that answers. Back over to the organizers.
Oh, sorry, Jason, I had myself on mute.
Okay.
So we also have a question that may be better directed towards Ashrad. It's a long question, but I think that the fundamental core of it is perhaps you could speak to how you see the financing that you secured for the NAP process and your adaptation efforts from the GCF for leveraging more integrated development and advancing achievement of things like the Sustainable Development Goals.
No, I think the funding that we have received, I mean, it's also, even if it was evaluated based on these criteria, isn't it? I mean, Jason can also complement to that. It was evaluated based on these criteria of advancing sustainable development and addressing especially gender inequality, poverty. I mean, it's by default, I mean, already been addressed within the proposal. So it is an iterative process that we have went through, and also most importantly, we haven't yet submitted our proposal for the readiness one, because that's what we are working on, and that's also underway.
Okay, great, thank you. And maybe we will then just squeeze one more question in for Jason. It's from Maria, who asked about if there's any guidance on the types of impacts and vulnerability assessments that should be part of the NAP window and that are eligible to be included in funding proposals.
Oh, that's a good. Well, let's see. I hope the microphone's passed over to me. That's a good question. You know, there are so many different methods for vulnerability and impact assessments. Provia has done this, so I think it's a 400 or 500 page guide on different assessments. UNEP DTU partnership has done other guides. UNEP has as well. Look, the specific methods used have so many variables. There's so many points to consider. One important one is how much money and how much time you want to dedicate to the vulnerability and impact assessment vis-a-vis actually using funds for later stage planning for attracting investment based on them and for implementation. A piece I would say when considering vulnerability and impact assessments is to consider what information already exists. Ensure not to duplicate. Often information exists, and the challenge is actually converting that information, using the information to drive decision making, which means including packaging it well and communicating it well to really drive decision making and planning. You know, what really is the information gap that's needed? Also include the focus on really identifying the adaptation options, prioritizing the adaptation options, building them into specific planning processes, be they municipal, sectoral, business, national scales at the different scales. So I don't know if that's fully answered the question, other than draw from existing methods. There are so many out there. Consider carefully. You know, you can do vulnerability and impact assessments for one sector that can take a couple of years and a large amounts of funds. Do you want something down and dirty? Do you want something very comprehensive? How do you want to use the information? What's already done before, and base that to choose from the set of methods that are out there. Hope that helps. And yes, GCF can fund. You know, if you can explain why strategically you want to use that method, then we're okay. You know, then we're okay with it. We just want it to be a sound, sensible method with strategic use of the resources.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jason. At this point in time, I think that we will close this webinar. I wish to thank the presenters for their presentations and providing us with greater insight into the GCF and the different options that are out there for financing NAP processes. I found the information that Azra provided on the experience in Ethiopia to be quite interesting, and thank him for sharing the lessons that he's learned through their process. I'd like to note that we've recorded this webinar, and we will be posting it along with the PowerPoint presentations on the NAP Global Network website. There will be a short evaluation slide that will launch in a couple of minutes and will be shared with you by email. We greatly encourage you to just take a couple of minutes to provide your feedback on the webinar. I'd also like to share with you a couple of ways in which you can become involved in the NAP Global Network. I should know that if you are interested, you can join the network as a participant just by registering online through our website. It's free and it's open to all, and you can do it on an individual basis. And it'll allow you to become informed about the activities of the network and things like our upcoming webinars. We are also encourage you to, if you're a participant in the network, to take a look at the opportunities for gaining technical support through our country support hub, and also to become involved in our South-South peer exchange program. And if you're a bilateral donor, we welcome you to collaborate with us to share information about your NAP relevant support and to become involved in coordination with other donors and participate in network meetings. And with that, I thank you very much and encourage you to be in touch with us at any time through the email address on our